Valora was a world once full of life, its skies painted in shades of orange and purple, its oceans sparkling with iridescent hues, and its forests teeming with exotic creatures. But all that had changed. The great cities that were once symbols of prosperity were now crumbling, their tall towers sagging and decaying. The trees that once towered above the land now lay withered, their branches brittle, their leaves long gone. The ground beneath was cracked, as if the planet itself was slowly dying. The very core of Valora, the heart that powered the entire planet, was failing. Its energy was draining, and no one had the knowledge or strength to save it. Talia, the last of the royal bloodline, stood at the edge of the planet's largest city, looking out at the barren land before her. Her silver hair flowed in the gentle, toxic wind, and her violet eyes shone with determination, though they carried a deep sorrow. She was not just a princess, she was the hope of her people. But even with all her intelligence, her powers, and her will, there was one thing she couldn't do: save her planet alone. She had researched every ancient text, consulted with the wisest sages of Valora, and sought out every possible solution. But the answer had always eluded her. The planet was dying, and time was running out. In her desperation, Talia made a decision. She would search beyond the stars, beyond Valora, to find a solution. It was a last-ditch effort, but it was all she had left. After gathering what she needed, she activated a long-dormant ancient spacecraft, one that her ancestors had once used to travel to distant worlds. As the ship launched into the void of space, Talia's heart weighed heavily with both hope and fear. What if there was no one out there who could help? What if she failed? After months of traveling through the cold, empty stretch of space, Talia arrived at a strange blue planet, Earth, the human world. She knew little about it, except that humans were known for their resilience and strength. Perhaps they had the answer she needed. And among them, there was one who was said to possess a rare kind of strength, a strength unlike any other. He was no ordinary man. His name was Reed, and although he lived a quiet life now, there was something in him that could save her planet. When Talia found him, she had to act fast. Reed had once been a soldier, fierce and unstoppable, but his glory days had faded. Now he lived alone, far from the bustle of cities. He wasn't interested in returning to his past, but Talia's plea for help, her unwavering belief in him, stirred something deep inside him. Still, Reed had his doubts. How could he, just one man, save an entire planet? How could his human strength, something he thought of as ordinary, be the key to saving Valora? But Talia wasn't giving up. She told him of the dire situation on her homeworld. She described how Valora's core was failing, and how only someone with immense physical strength could channel the power needed to save it. Reed wasn't convinced at first. He was just a man, a human, and that didn't seem like enough to him. But Talia's determination was contagious, and slowly the seed of hope began to take root inside him. Reed agreed to help, though he was far from certain about his ability to do what Talia asked. He had never faced something like this before, and the weight of saving an entire planet was a heavy burden to bear. But Talia believed in him, and perhaps that was enough. As they prepared to leave Earth behind and head to Valora, Reed felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. No longer was he just a soldier fighting for survival. He was about to embark on a journey that could change everything, not just for him, but for an entire world. With one final look at the Earth he once knew, Reed stepped into the spacecraft alongside Talia. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were the last hope for a dying planet, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey through the vastness of space was long and silent. The spacecraft cut through the darkness, its sleek design a stark contrast to the empty void that surrounded it. Talia sat in the cockpit, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. Her mind was focused, but her heart raced. She had put all her faith in Reed, a human she barely knew. Could he truly save Valora? Or had she made a mistake by bringing him here? Beside her, Reed sat quietly, staring out of the small window. The stars seemed so distant now, and the Earth he had left behind felt like a lifetime ago. He had never imagined he would find himself in a situation like this, on a strange alien world, about to help save a planet he had never heard of. But something about Talia's resolve had drawn him in. Her strength, her belief in him, was contagious. It made him wonder if there was more to his own strength than he had ever realized. After what felt like an eternity, the spaceship broke through the atmosphere of Valora. Reed gazed out the window, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the sight. The planet below was beautiful in its own way, but there was an unmistakable sadness to it. The once vibrant green of its forests had turned to brown, and the oceans, once full of life, now looked like a dull, lifeless expanse. The skies were heavy with clouds, the sun struggling to pierce through the thick layer of smog. Talia didn't say a word as they descended toward the surface. She had grown up on Valora, and seeing her home in such a state broke her heart. She had tried so hard to save it, and now it seemed like the last hope was in Reed's hands. As the spacecraft touched down on the cracked surface of Valora, Reed's feet hit the ground with a heavy thud. The air was thin and tasted strange in his mouth. It wasn't quite like Earth's atmosphere, but it wasn't the worst he had experienced either. He glanced around, taking in the barren landscape. The land stretched for miles, but there was nothing here. No signs of life, no movement, just the empty silence of a dying world. Talia stepped out first, her silver hair catching the light of the distant sun. Her violet eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of what lay ahead. Reed followed, feeling the weight of the journey ahead pressing down on him. He had no idea what they would find or what kind of dangers awaited them. He had only agreed to help, not knowing the full extent of the challenges they would face. "Come on," Talia said, her voice steady. "We don't have much time." Reed nodded, his muscles tense with anticipation. They began walking through the desolate landscape, the ground beneath them cracked and uneven. There were no animals, no sounds, only the occasional gust of wind that stirred the dust around them. It was as if the entire planet had fallen silent, mourning its fate. As they ventured deeper into the wasteland, Reed couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. The air felt heavy, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He glanced at Talia, noticing the determination in her eyes. She was leading the way, but there was something more to her than just royalty. She carried the weight of her people on her shoulders, and Reed could see how deeply the responsibility had affected her. "We need to reach the core stabilization chamber," Talia said, breaking the silence. "It's a long way from here, but it's the only place where we can attempt to save Valora." Reed nodded, his brow furrowing. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Talia's gaze softened for a moment, but her voice remained firm. "Only you can channel the strength needed to stabilize the core. Your human power is something we've never seen before. It's the only way to save my planet." Reed felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. Could his strength really do something so impossible? He had always been strong, but was he strong enough to save an entire world? He wanted to believe in Talia, to believe in himself, but the doubt lingered. "We'll find out soon enough," Reed muttered, trying to shake off the unease. "Let's get to work." Talia gave him a quick, reassuring smile before turning her focus back to the path ahead. She knew the journey would be perilous, but she also knew that Reed was their best chance. For better or worse, she had put her faith in him, and now she had to trust that he would rise to the challenge. There was no turning back now. The path to the core stabilization chamber was harder than either of them had expected. The landscape grew more hostile with each step, the cracks in the earth widening, and the air growing thicker, heavy with the weight of the dying planet. The once great cities of Valora were nothing but ruins now, their buildings reduced to rubble, their streets empty and forgotten. No life stirred here. It was as if Valora itself had given up, waiting for its final breath. Talia led the way, her footsteps sure and steady, though there was a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. She had always been strong, the last hope for her people, but with every mile they traveled, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. She had come so far, had done everything she could to save her planet. And now it all came down to Reed. Reed, for his part, struggled to keep pace. His mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and fear. He had agreed to help, but now that they were so close to the chamber, the gravity of the situation pressed down on him. He wasn't sure he had the strength for this. Could he really stabilize the core of an entire planet with his human strength? His thoughts were interrupted by Talia's voice, steady and unwavering. "We're almost there," she said, her tone firm, but with a hint of weariness. Reed glanced up, trying to focus on the task ahead. The chamber wasn't far now, just beyond a jagged ridge of rock. He could see it in the distance, an enormous structure, its shape twisted and broken by years of neglect. It had once been a place of power, a place where Valora's leaders had come to harness the planet's core energy. Now it looked like a crumbling tomb, its energy long gone. As they approached the chamber's entrance, Talia's steps slowed, her eyes scanning the surrounding area. The silence here was eerie, even more oppressive than before. The air was thick with a strange, unnatural energy that seemed to hum in the back of Reed's mind, tugging at his senses. "I don't like this," Reed muttered under his breath, his instincts telling him something was wrong. "It feels off." Talia nodded, her expression grim. "The chamber is protected by ancient security systems. They were meant to keep intruders out. But now, they're more of a threat than ever." Before Reed could ask what she meant, the ground beneath them trembled, and the air seemed to crackle with static. A low, mechanical hum began to reverberate through the earth, and Reed felt a chill crawl up his spine. The entrance to the chamber slowly began to open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. Talia hesitated, her eyes narrowed. "This is it. We have to go in. The core is failing faster than we thought." Reed felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He had imagined the challenge would be hard, but not this terrifying. Yet he could see the determination in Talia's eyes, the same fierce resolve that had driven her to find him, to bring him to this dying world. If she could keep going, so could he. "Let's get this over with," Reed said, trying to muster some courage. They stepped into the chamber, the air growing colder with each step they took. The walls of the chamber were lined with strange, glowing symbols, their meaning lost to time. In the center of the room stood the core, its heart a pulsing orb of dark energy. It flickered weakly, barely alive, as if it too was fighting to survive. Talia moved toward the core, her eyes fixed on the dying energy. "This is where it all ends," she said softly. "If we fail here, Valora will fall." Reed swallowed hard. He didn't know if he was ready for this. But Talia's words cut through the fear. She was right. There was no turning back. His human strength, whatever it was all they had. "I'll do it," Reed said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. Talia nodded, her face a mask of determination. "Place your hands on the core. Focus on your strength. Let it flow through you." Reed stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly as he reached out toward the orb. The moment his fingers brushed against it, a surge of energy shot through him, jolting him to the core of his being. His muscles tensed as if they were being pulled in every direction. The power of the core was unlike anything he had ever felt, intense, raw, and endless. But Reed didn't pull away. He dug deep, focusing on the strength that had always been inside him. The strength he had never fully understood. He didn't know if it would work, but he had no choice but to try. The core responded, its flickering light growing brighter, stronger, as the energy began to stabilize under his touch. Talia watched, her breath held, her heart racing. This was it, the moment of truth. As Reed's hands rested on the pulsating core, an overwhelming energy surged through him. It wasn't just power, it was life itself, coursing through his veins, fighting against the deep-rooted despair of Valora's dying core. His body trembled with the intensity of it, and he felt like he was on the edge of something immense, something he couldn't control, but also couldn't let go of. Talia stood at a distance, watching with wide, fearful eyes. She knew that if Reed faltered, if he let go of that energy for even a second, Valora's fate would be sealed. But there was something in his stance now, something that was different from when he had first arrived. His human strength wasn't just physical, it was a force of will, a determination that could overcome the impossible. She had always believed in his potential, but now, seeing him channel the planet's very life force, she realized just how much she had underestimated him. Reed clenched his jaw, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to maintain his grip. The energy was overwhelming, swirling around him like a storm, tugging at every part of his being. It wasn't just his hands that hurt anymore. It felt as if every inch of his body was on fire. But he couldn't stop. If he stopped, the planet would die, and Talia's people would never get another chance. The core beneath him responded to his strength, its flickering light growing steadier. For a moment, Reed thought he saw a faint ripple in the air around him, as if the energy had found a new balance. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound deafening in his ears as he poured everything he had into the core. Talia stepped closer, her breath shaky, not knowing whether to help or to stand back. She had never seen anything like this, and she wasn't sure if Reed was even aware of how close he was to the breaking point. "Reed, you need to focus," Talia called out, her voice urgent, though she tried not to break his concentration. But Reed didn't answer. He couldn't. All he could hear now was the roar of the energy around him, the pull of the core sinking deeper into his soul. He felt the pressure building within him, but he had come too far to turn back. The thought of failing, of seeing Valora crumble into nothingness, filled him with a fire he hadn't known he possessed. He wasn't just fighting for Valora anymore. He was fighting for Talia, for the world that had given her so much, for the life that still had a chance to be saved. As the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, the core's glow intensified. It flickered once more, then steadied completely. Reed's vision blurred with the force of the energy, and for a moment, he was uncertain of what was real and what wasn't. But then, there was a shift. The heat in his body began to cool, and the pressure that had been crushing him lessened. The core's energy was no longer wild, it was stable. He slowly opened his eyes, gasping for breath as his hands trembled above the core. The bright, blinding light of the orb softened, turning from a fierce, angry red to a calmer shade of blue, a sign that it was no longer unstable. Valora's heart had been revived for now. Talia rushed forward, her face a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had never imagined this moment would come so easily. Reed had done it. The core had been saved, and with it, the future of her planet. "You did it," Talia whispered, her voice trembling with relief and emotion. Reed stepped back, his body sore, his muscles stiff from the strain. His heart was still racing, but the weight of the energy pressing down on him had finally released. He had done what seemed impossible, and yet the victory felt hollow. The battle wasn't over yet. Valora was still a dying world, and there was still so much left to do. The core might have been stabilized, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. "I couldn't have done it without you," Reed said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know if I was strong enough, but I had to try. For you, for your people." Talia smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You didn't just save my people, Reed. You saved Valora." For a moment, the two of them stood there, side by side, watching as the core's light pulsed steadily in the center of the chamber. The weight of the moment settled on them, but there was still a sense of uncertainty in the air. Valora had been given a second chance, but it wasn't over yet. They both knew that. But for the first time since they had landed, there was hope. Reed's strength had proven to be more than just human. It was the kind of strength that could change the course of an entire planet's future. Reed and Talia stood before the core, its steady light now a symbol of hope for Valora. They had achieved the impossible, and yet the silence in the chamber felt heavier than ever. Reed's body still hummed with the residual energy from the core, but his mind was elsewhere. He could feel the weight of the moments settling over him like a blanket. He had helped save an entire planet, but the victory felt incomplete. Talia, on the other hand, had never felt so conflicted. She had hoped this day would bring nothing but relief, but instead she found herself questioning everything. The core had been stabilized, but Valora's recovery was far from guaranteed. The planet was still dying, its resources nearly depleted, and its people scattered and broken. What they had done here, at the heart of the planet, was only a temporary fix. They had saved the core, but the question remained, could they save the world? Reed turned to her, sensing her unease. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft. Talia's eyes flickered toward the chamber's entrance, where the dim light barely reached. "It's not enough," she murmured. "The core might be stable, but Valora needs so much more. Its atmosphere is damaged, its ecosystems are collapsing. There are entire cities that have been abandoned, millions of people scattered, waiting for a miracle." She paused, her voice breaking. "I thought we had a chance, but I'm not sure we do anymore." Reed's heart sank. He had thought that by saving the core, they had accomplished something monumental, that everything would start to improve. But Talia's words were a stark reminder of the truth. There was so much more to be done. The planet's systems, its very foundation, were shattered. The core alone couldn't undo centuries of damage. Reed didn't have the answers. He was just a human, a mere man in a galaxy of advanced species and technology. What could he do now? "You've done more than anyone could have imagined," Talia said, as if sensing his thoughts. "I don't know how you were able to channel the core's energy, but it's enough to give us hope. It's enough to keep fighting." Reed shook his head. "Hope is nothing without a plan. The core is stable, but it's just one part of a much larger puzzle." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration building inside him. "I don't know how to fix the rest of this. I'm not some kind of miracle worker. I don't have the answers." Talia stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No one is asking you to be perfect. You've already done the impossible. But together, we can find a way to save Valora. We can rebuild. It won't be easy, but we can try." Reed looked at her, his doubts still lingering in the back of his mind. Her words offered comfort, but he wasn't sure how much hope they could truly give in a world that was so broken. What if they failed? What if, in the end, it was all for nothing? Talia could see the struggle in his eyes. "I know you're scared. I am too. But we can't give up now. If we give up, then we have nothing. We have to keep moving forward." Reed took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. Talia was right. There was no turning back now. They had made it this far, and if there was even the smallest chance of saving Valora, he would take it. He owed it to her. He owed it to the people of this planet. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "What do we do next?" Talia gave him a small, grateful smile. "There's a research facility on the other side of Valora's northern continent. It's one of the last places where we might find the technology we need to restore the planet's atmosphere. We'll need to get there fast, before the core's stabilization fades." Reed nodded, determination flooding his veins once more. There was still so much to do, but now he had a purpose. For the first time since he had arrived on Valora, he felt like he might actually be able to help. "I'm with you," he said firmly. And with that, they began their journey once more. The unknown stretched out before them, and the weight of what they had to accomplish was daunting, but there was no turning back. For Valora, for Talia, for the chance of a future, they would keep going, no matter what it took. Reed and Talia set off in silence, the weight of their mission hanging heavy between them. The vast landscape of Valora stretched out ahead, Its once vibrant terrain now marred by scars of environmental collapse. Cracked earth and withered trees lined their path as they journeyed northward. The planet's wounds were undeniable, but Reed refused to let it overwhelm him. If there was even the smallest chance to save Valora, he would take it. Talia, her gaze fixed on the horizon, walked beside him. She had always known Valora's beauty, the richness of its green valleys and sparkling rivers. But now, as they ventured deeper into the decaying world, she felt the sting of loss with each step. She had seen the stories of her ancestors, of how Valora had once thrived under the warmth of its core, how its people had prospered, and how the balance of nature had been maintained for eons. Now, it all seemed like a distant memory, a dream that might never come true again. Her heart ached with every glance at the barren landscape, but she pushed the feelings aside. This mission was more important than her personal grief. With Reed by her side, maybe there was still a chance. As the hours passed, the two traveled further into the unknown, the cold winds of the northern continent growing stronger. Reed could feel the fatigue starting to set in, his muscles aching from the physical strain of channeling the core's energy earlier. But Talia didn't stop. She walked with the purpose of someone who had already faced too much loss to turn back now. Her determination drove him forward. "Are we close?" Reed asked, his voice hoarse from the dry air. Talia nodded, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. "We should be. The research facility is located near the remains of an old city. It's a place few people dare to visit now." Reed frowned. "Why?" Talia hesitated. The facility was abandoned after the atmosphere began to deteriorate. People say strange things have been happening there ever since. Glowing lights in the sky, strange sounds in the night. Some say the place is cursed, but I don't believe in curses. I believe it's just another sign of Valora's decay. Reed didn't know whether to believe her, but the caution in her voice made him uneasy. He wasn't sure what they would find at the facility, but he knew it had to be important. If there was any chance of fixing the planet's atmosphere, this research facility held the key. As they approached the outskirts of the northern city, the air seemed to grow thicker. The atmosphere felt heavier, as if the very land itself was holding its breath. Reed's hand instinctively went to the weapon at his side, though he wasn't sure what danger they might face. Talia, on the other hand, seemed calm, too calm, considering the eerie stillness surrounding them. They reached the gates of the facility, a massive decaying structure that looked like it had once been a hub of innovation and progress. But now it was nothing more than a shell of its former self. The walls were covered in vines, and the broken windows seemed to watch them with a silent, mournful gaze. Reed turned to Talia. "This is it." Talia nodded, though a flicker of uncertainty passed through her eyes. "This is where we find our answers." Together, they walked through the entrance, stepping into the darkness of the facility. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the echo of their footsteps. The further they went, the more it felt like the world had been abandoned, as if time had stopped in this place. Reed's pulse quickened. Something was off. He could feel it. Suddenly, they rounded a corner, and Talia froze. Reed followed her gaze and saw what had stopped her in her tracks. In the center of a vast, empty room was a large machine, still humming faintly. It looked ancient, its metal surfaces rusted, but it was still functional. "What is it?" Reed asked, stepping forward. Talia's voice was barely above a whisper. This is the core generator. It's designed to stabilize the planet's atmosphere." Reed's heart raced. This was it, the key to saving Valora. But as he approached the machine, he noticed something strange. The air around it felt cold, unnaturally cold, and in the distance, he thought he saw a shadow move across the wall. He turned quickly, his hand reaching for his weapon, but there was nothing there, only silence. The coldness deepened, and Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Talia stepped closer to the machine, but her eyes darted around nervously. "We need to activate it," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "It's the only way to restore the atmosphere." Reed nodded, though his mind was still on the shadow he had seen. Something wasn't right about this place. But for Valora, for Talia, he couldn't afford to let fear hold him back. With a deep breath, he moved to the control panel, ready to make the move that would change everything. Reed's fingers hovered over the control panel, the lights flickering dimly as his heart raced. The machine before him, though ancient and worn, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was an eerie feeling, as if the very structure of Valora was responding to his touch. He glanced at Talia, whose eyes were fixed on the machine with a mixture of hope and dread. She had said this was the key to saving the atmosphere, to restoring what had been lost. But the air around them felt thick, charged with something dangerous. The room seemed to hum with a strange energy, like a warning. "You're sure this will work?" Reed asked, his voice tense as he turned to her. Reed wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that this machine, buried in the heart of a forgotten city, could be the answer they had been searching for. But as he moved his hand toward the panel, the coldness in the room seemed to grow, pressing in on him. He could feel it in his bones, the heaviness of the place. Something was wrong. Something was waiting. He pressed a button. The lights above them flickered, and the machine rumbled to life, sending a low vibration through the floor. Reed's breath caught in his chest as the ground beneath them shook. The walls groaned, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire facility was on the brink of collapse. Talia grabbed his arm, her grip firm, and Reed could see the fear in her eyes now. She had been so sure, so confident, but now the doubt was creeping in. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Reed didn't have an answer. The machine was whirring, its energy rising rapidly. The coldness had turned into an almost suffocating chill, and the air crackled with an electric tension. He could see the lights flickering wildly, the shadows in the room stretching unnaturally. It was as if the very fabric of reality was warping around them. "I don't know," Reed muttered, trying to make sense of the readings flashing across the panel. "The core's energy is reacting, but it's not the way I thought it would." Talia stepped closer, her eyes wide with realization. "This isn't just a generator, it's a doorway." Reed frowned. A doorway? To where? Before she could answer, the floor beneath them gave way with a deafening crack. Reed and Talia stumbled as the ground shook violently, the walls trembling as if they were alive. The machine, now glowing with an otherworldly light, sent a pulse of energy that sent them both crashing to the ground. The air around them grew even colder, and Reed's breath turned to mist in front of him. Talia's voice was barely a whisper, filled with both awe and terror. "This was never just about saving Valora. It's about something else, something ancient." Reed scrambled to his feet, his pulse pounding in his ears. The machine continued to hum, its energy pulsing with growing intensity. He looked at Talia, but her expression had changed. She was no longer just a companion on this mission. She was something else, too. There was a shift in her, an understanding in her eyes, as if the secrets of the past had suddenly come rushing back to her. "This is it," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The machine is drawing from something far older than Valora. It's a link to the ancient powers that once ruled this planet." Reed didn't understand, but the sense of danger was undeniable. The air was thick with a dark energy, and he could feel his muscles tensing, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But they couldn't. Not now. Not when they were so close. "We have to shut it down," Reed said urgently, turning to the control panel, but Talia grabbed his arm before he could move. "No," she said firmly, shaking her head. "We can't stop it now. Not until we understand what it's trying to do." Reed's stomach churned. Everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, might be undone by this very machine. But Talia's conviction was unshakable, and in her eyes, he saw something he hadn't noticed before, a deep knowledge, as though she had been expecting this all along. He stepped back, his hands raised in defeat. What now? Talia's gaze was fixed on the machine as it continued to glow brighter, its energy spreading out like a web through the facility. We wait. We see what happens next, and we trust that this is the only way forward. The uncertainty hung between them like a dark cloud. Reed knew that the choices they had made had led them to this moment, but the price of salvation was becoming clearer with every passing second. What would they have to sacrifice for Valora to survive? And more importantly, were they ready for the consequences of their actions? As the machine continued to hum and glow, Reed and Talia stood together, their fate inextricably tied to the unknown forces that now controlled the future of Valora. The next step could change everything. The room pulsed with energy, each thrum of the machine reverberating through Reed's chest. The glowing lights had intensified, filling the space with an eerie, almost hypnotic glow. Talia stood in front of the machine, her eyes wide as if drawn to its power, her face set with an expression Reed couldn't quite place. He wanted to believe in the possibility of salvation, to trust that this was the solution they had been searching for, but the growing sense of dread was almost too overwhelming to ignore. Reed's thoughts raced as he glanced back at Talia. The decision now lay in their hands. Was this the way to restore Valora's dying atmosphere, or were they about to awaken something far darker than they could handle? He could see the struggle in her eyes. She knew this wasn't just a simple machine. It was a relic of an ancient power, a force that had been forgotten for eons. And yet Talia seemed resolute, as though she had already made peace with the uncertainty. "Is this really the answer?" Reed asked, his voice low, almost uncertain. Reed didn't know what to think. He wanted to believe in her, to trust her intuition, but the creeping unease that had settled deep in his bones since they first entered the facility only grew stronger. The energy from the machine was no longer just felt in the air. It was alive, wrapping around them, pulling at their very souls. Something was stirring within the depths of Valora, something ancient and powerful, and Reed wasn't sure if it was a force they could control. The lights flickered above them, casting long shadows that twisted like living things on the walls. Reed stepped forward, toward the control panel, but his hand hesitated just above it. There was something in the back of his mind urging him to stop, to pull away before it was too late. But Talia had made her choice, and so had he. They had come this far together. He couldn't back out now. "I'm going to do it," Reed said quietly, finally placing his hand on the panel. "For Valora." Talia turned to him then, her eyes searching his face. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, as if she could read his doubts, as if she knew he wasn't just concerned about Valora's fate, but about what they might lose in the process. Reed nodded, taking a deep breath. "We don't have a choice." He pressed the final button, and for a moment, there was nothing. The machine seemed to freeze, as if it were holding its breath. Then, with a low hum that shook the entire building, it came to life once more. The energy around them exploded in a wave of light, so bright that Reed had to shield his eyes. He could feel the power surging through the room, through his body, as though the very air was alive, swirling around him. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Reed staggered, his knees buckling under the force of it. Talia's voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the noise. "It's too much. Shut it down now." But it was too late. The machine had already taken control. Reed's mind seemed to spin, his vision narrowing as the room seemed to blur and distort. He could hear Talia calling his name, but the sound was muffled, distant. He was no longer sure where he was. His body felt disconnected, as if he was being pulled into a vast, infinite void. Then, in the midst of the chaos, a sudden clarity broke through. Reed saw images, visions of the past, of Valora before it had fallen into decay. The beauty of the planet, the lush forests and vibrant skies, the harmony between the people and the land. But with those images came something darker. Reed saw glimpses of destruction, of wars fought over power, of forces far beyond his understanding tearing the planet apart. And then a voice echoed in his mind, a whisper so faint it could have been a dream. But somehow, he knew it was real. You cannot save Valora by returning to the past. You must reshape the future. The words echoed in his mind, their weight pressing down on him. Reed felt as if he was being torn between two worlds, the one that had once been, and the one that was yet to come. The machine was a link to something far more powerful, something that could either save them or destroy everything they knew. Reed. Talia's voice broke through the haze, her hand grasping his arm. He turned to look at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Do it," she urged, her voice pleading now. "We have to commit. We can't turn back." Reed nodded, his decision made. The machine had chosen its path, and so had he. He reached out, his hand steady now, and activated the final sequence. The world around them seemed to shudder, the machine's energy now fully unleashed. In that moment, Reed knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, Valora's fate, and their own, would never be the same again. The machine had been their last hope, but at what cost?